That over billions of years anything is possible, but would you ever expect someone to win the lottery every single day for 10 years straight? That's essentially the odds that they're claiming anything is possible. If that happened, a court of law would call that guy guilty, send him to jail for the rest of his life because he's cheating. Even if they don't know how he's cheating, they would have to conclude that you are cheating because this is impossible. So their idea that anything is possible is really ridiculous on the face of it.
Would require more time and material than is in the known universe to have ever evolved by chance. Once you can buy all that and accept it, once you can accept photosynthesis having formed by chance, I don't see a hill of beans difference between believing it happened by chance in 6,000 years versus 6 billion years. I mean, one's just as improbable as the other. We've reached a point where the p-values are so low that what's the difference? But evolutionists know that their arguments would be even less tenable to laymen if the times were shortened too much for them.
We say humans are very complicated and a sponge or a jellyfish would be very non-complicated. But it's really funny because a jellyfish, or at least the sea anemone, has got about the same number of protein-coding genes as people. So in all these billions of years of supposed evolution, we actually haven't increased the number of genes hardly at all. And a lot of the genes that they have that we thought at first was something specific to vertebrates or specific to higher life forms, they have them also. So the evolutionists scratching their head. The simplest cell is utterly complex. The simplest life out there is so mind-bogglingly complex that to me, it's impossible to conceive that it just spontaneously evolved from random chemicals. There is an unbridgeable gap between the simplest cell and random chemistry. It's sort of like saying, oh, well, we can find, if you go out in nature, you can find a rock sitting on top of another rock. Just from natural processes, you know, maybe fell off the cliff and landed on top of another rock. And because you can find rocks sitting on top of rocks, that explains the Great Pyramids. Well, of course, that's ridiculous.
We have decay. We have the second law of thermodynamics. I look in the mirror every day and it's hitting me with a vengeance. Yeah, we've been told that if our theories ever run counter to the second law, we can be pretty sure they're not right. The second law basically tells us that at least a closed system, everything goes downhill. Things fall apart. They don't spontaneously self-assemble over the long haul. The evolutionist tries to get out of this by arguing that the Earth is an open system, that energy keeps impacting on the Earth from the sun, and that this energy sort of drives the evolution uphill and causes entropy then to decrease rather than increase. This is really not a good argument. We know that energy is necessary for the assembly of complex things. That's true in an automobile plant. Without energy, the plant comes to a halt. But energy by itself is a necessary but not sufficient condition of, say, making automobiles. One needs information, you need programs, you need sequences. Things have to be done in a certain order. Parts have to arrive at a certain time, have to fit other parts. There's an integration of complexity. Energy alone is not sufficient to explain it.
The Achilles heel in evolutionary theory is a lack of transitional species. There should be millions of transitional species. There should be tremendous numbers of transitional species between the major groups of animals, but there aren't. In fact, you've got the Cambrian explosion where all the major phyla of life, the biggest differences that exist, they just poof, appear out of nowhere with no transitional species. You've got Darwin saying that he's leaving up to future generations of geologists to discover all the innumerable transitional species that must exist. But since the 1960s, the fossil record's changed by about 4%. So what they have is a handful of disputable transitional species. Those transitional species they use today were not the ones they used in the 1970s. It's not the ones they used at the 1925 Scopes trial. It's not the ones that Charles Darwin had in his day. Each transitional species seems to have a shelf life of maybe 10 years. And then it's kind of quietly shuffled off to the side, and they think of something else, and something else is brought up as a transitional species. I mean, you had the famous Evolution of the Horse series. Everyone remembers that, the little horse or the big horse. That's not found in the textbooks anymore, and if it is, it shouldn't be, because that's been routinely and soundly discredited. And a lot of the other things that people would remember as the best evidence for evolution really turned out to be no evidence at all.
Charles Darwin did the same thing when he thought up his idea of evolution. He saw that the facts of the fossil record did not line up with his theory, and so he made a very unscientific decision. He decided to hold on to his theory and ignore the facts. The same thing happened in the 21st century. Mary Schweitzer said in Discover magazine, April of 2006, quote, "I had one reviewer tell me he didn't care what the data said. He knew that what I was finding wasn't possible. I wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none," end quote. And so here's a perfect example of where people are saying, I have my unproved theory of evolution that spans many, many millions of years, where there's no creator, no designer, it's just time, chance, and natural processes, but the facts don't line up with it. I'd rather hold on to the theory than the facts.
Many of the opponents of young Earth creationism point to young Earth creationists as being the enemies of science, that they don't think rationally and they actually stop good science being done. In fact, when you look at the really great breakthroughs of science in recent decades, very often you'll find those who made those breakthroughs were Christians and certainly understood the God of creation.
I mean, who can we name bigger, more influential than Isaac Newton? He was a Bible-believing Christian. Pasteur, Kepler. I mean, we're not just talking about mere Nobel Prize winners. We're talking about people who opened up whole areas of science.
Boyle, Maxwell, Faraday, George Washington Carver, Louis Pasteur, all of these men of science who are also men of God, who believe that in the beginning, God created.
So many people think it's the religion versus science. No, it's the science built on one religion versus the science built on a different religion. And see, I start with the belief that God's word is true, that we have reliable eyewitness accounts of what happened in the past, therefore I build my science on that, whereas an evolutionist has a belief in millions of years with no God, just everything happening slowly and gradually, and he builds his science on that. What most people have to decide which view is correct.
The search continued for Danny, and the tracks he had made were easy to follow. Soon the authorities were searching the water, and Danny had to leave his cave and dive deeper and deeper. Somehow, though, despite not finding a friend, he didn't feel as alone as before. Someone out there must have loved him, enough to make him. He may be different, but he was loved.
I think that a dinosaur is described in detail more than most other animals in the Bible. I really do. For instance, when you go to Job 40, there we have an account of God speaking with a man called Job, and this was after the flood. And he was saying to Job, look at this animal called Behemoth.
Now that's just not an English word, that's just a transliteration of a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word there is plural, because Behemoth is a well-known word for a beast. So Behemoth is saying it's the beast of beasts, and God said to Job, behold this. So he was expecting Job to understand what he was talking about, and what I made along with you. So it implies that it was made alongside mankind, and then it says, so it's a beast of beasts made along with mankind.
Everything about it is big. His legs are big. His bones are strong like brass and iron. He's an enormous creature, chief of the ways of God. Some Hebrew experts say that means it was the largest land animal God made. And you know, the largest land animal we know of today from the fossil record are some of your dinosaurs, like your sauropods, like a Seismosaurus or something. And then it has a tail like a cedar. Well, you think of the cedars of Lebanon. I mean, a tail like a cedar, that'd be an enormous tail. You know, many Bible commentaries, for instance, the NIV Study Bible in the notes actually says this was a hippopotamus or an elephant. But a hippopotamus tail is like a little flap of skin. And, you know, an elephant's tail is like a piece of rope hanging in the wind.
It's really difficult to know why many commentators, even conservative commentators, are unwilling to take the descriptions in the book of Job about this creature and to try to apply them to a hippopotamus or some other animal when the description doesn't fit. I suppose only they themselves know their motives, and the Lord. Is it that they're afraid of looking foolish or, you know, scientifically simplistic or whatever? But it is very clear that the description of the animal there in Job's book is not a hippopotamus.
When we look at the description of that creature,